Hi, hello. Welcome to the session. So today's session is tracing module. Let's begin. Let's learn about this tracing module. So today's agenda is what is tracing module operations, and scope of with correlation ID, and our favorite POC. So what is tracing module? So tracing module can be used to improve logs in Mule applications. It provides MDC logging. So MDC, which stands for mapped diagnostic context. It will update the logs with more information by adding, removing, and clearing all variables from the logging context for a given Mule event. So the tracing module clear logging variables, remove logging variables, and set logging variable operations enable you to enhance your logs by adding, removing, and clearing variables from the logging context of a single Mule event. So we will learn more, we will discuss more about this tracing module in the upcoming slides and POC. So before you begin with this tracing module, you need to make some changes in the log4j2.xml file under source main resources section. So change the pattern layouts in the log4j.xml file. So step 1 is in the appender section, you need to change this console, and after that you have to add this MDC, %MDC. And then in the second step, you need to refer this appender reference for console, so that whatever the changes, whatever the logs you want to print, those logs with this updated removing, addition, or different kinds of variables, whatever you have added from tracing module, those you can able to see in this console section after making these two steps. So here you need to add the module to your Mule project. So here I have defined 5 different steps how to add. So in the Mule palette view, click search in Exchange. In the add dependencies to project window, type tracing in the search field. So click tracing module in available modules, click add and click finish, so that you can able to see the tracing connector in this section. And these are the different types of operations which are performed by this tracing module. So the operations are like clear logging variable, remove logging variable, and set logging variables. Apart from these operations, this tracing module can also perform scope. So the scope of this tracing module is with correlation ID. So let's briefly describe about these 4 operations performed by tracing module. First one is set logging operation. So we will practically discuss all these things in the POC. So here you can configure the set logging variable operation to log variables based on the request payload and attributes. So whatever the payload you are sending as a request from that payload, whatever you want to store the value, that value you can store it here under this value section, and you have to provide a variable name. So this is the payload I am hitting this payload to this flow. So here I am creating a variable, and I am naming that variable as test_var, and I am defining the value as payload.customer ID. So I want to store this customer ID from the payload in this set logging variable. Like the same way, I have created another set logging variable with the name order ID. Next, remove logging operation. So this remove logging operation, whenever you want to remove a variable which you have created in the event, the flow, that variable you can remove it from the flow through this remove logging variable. So here in this configuration section, I have given this order ID. This order ID variable I have created previously in the flow. So you can remove the particular set logging variable operation by passing a particular variable name. By passing this variable name, you can remove that particular variable from the flow. So clear logging operation. So from this clear logging operation, so this is the configuration. Display name is clear logging variables. So whenever you are performing this operation, you can clear whatever the set logging variables you have created in the flow. All variables will be removed. So through remove logging operation, you can remove only that particular variable. But with this clear logging operation, you can remove all the variables which you have created in the flow. So scope of with correlation ID. So what is correlation ID? A correlation ID is a randomly generated identifier for every request entering a distributed system. So developers use the correlation identifier to trace the request as it makes its way through the system and identify any cyber security threats or any data issues. So in those cases, this correlation ID is used to trace that particular event. So this is the correlation ID configuration. Here the display name is with correlation ID, and in the correlation ID section, you can add, this is the general default value that is generated under attitude session correlation ID. So for that correlation ID, if you want to make some unique changes, those changes you can add, or otherwise you want to remove this correlation ID and you want to define your own correlation ID, that also you can pass in this particular section. So the scenarios are like, if you might want to change the correlation ID of the event for a given scope or a set of operations. Suppose if you are processing the results of a database query inside a for each scope and you want to correlate the event with the register you are processing. So in this particular scenario, you can define your own correlation ID. And in the next scenario, if you are consuming a JMS message queue and you want to proceed using the JMS correlation ID for traceability purpose. So for this JMS operation, when you are dealing with this JMS operation, that JMS correlation ID will be there. If you want to trace that particular operation with this JMS correlation ID, you can provide this JMS correlation ID. Or if you are dealing with a database, whatever you want to print in that particular correlation ID, you can provide. So for these scenarios, the tracing module with correlation ID scope enables you to modify the correlation ID during the execution of that particular scope. So let's begin the POC. So as we discussed previously, we need to make some changes in this log4j2.xml. So here I have added, for this appenders, I have given this name as console, and I have given this %mdc. And let me show you the normal one also, normal project, how this log4j2 file appenders will look. This is the sample one. Under this source main resources, this is the log4j2, and under this appender section of normal APIs, you can see the rolling file, name, file, and these all things will be there. But if you are dealing with tracing module, you need to modify or you need to make few changes in this particular .xml. So here I have removed these and I have added %mdc. And along with that, I made one more small change. One more small change I have done, that is I have added here in this async root, I have added this console in this tracing module API. And in this session, you can see that async logger name, this is info, and appender reference is file. But here I am referring that as console. So these are the two changes I have made to run this tracing module. So let's begin our POC. So already it is in debugging mode. So let me explain you what and all the things I have kept here. So here I have taken a listener, and this is the listener configuration. Just I have taken this localhost and port 8081, and I have added this path as test, and I have taken a simple logger, and here I am printing the payload in this logger, and here this is set variable. I'm I'm creating a I'm creating a variable in this set logging variable, that is test var, and value I am defining it as payload.customer ID. From the postman I am hitting this request, and I am storing these two fields into two different variables. So customer ID I am storing here in this variable, and in the next variable I am placing this order ID under this variable name order ID. So I am referring this order ID from payload. So payload.order ID, that is the value defined for this variable. And in this logger, I'm just for tracking purpose, I have kept this logger and I did not mention anything, to just show you if we don't mention anything, what and all the fields which are printed in this logger. And after that, so let me hit on this and we will check till here. So this is already in debugging mode. Let me hit with this request. Now the request came here. Just go to next processor. The next processor, let me show you what and all the variables which are created in this logger. Let me go to this console, and this is the initial logger. I defined payload to print in this logger, and this is the information which is defined in this logger: correlation ID, processor path, and all. So here basically in this logger, if you see this logger in this console, you can find this correlation ID and processor path. So here I have added two variables. Let's see where they will print. These two variables where they will print. Let me go to this Mule debugger and hit this next processor. So let us check this logger. Go to this console, hit it one more time. So if you go and see this console, so these all are the default values which will be printed in this logger if you don't mention anything. See, payload and request path is /test, and raw request path is /test, method is get, listener path, local address, query string, relative path, masked request path, remote address, request URI, raw request scheme, and these are all the default values which will be printed in this logger if you don't mention anything. So if you want to print these headers, then you can mention attributes.headers so that this section will be printed. So if you want to print, if you are passing any query parameters from the request, then you can mention attributes.query parameter. Then this section will print. So here we did not mention anything in this logger, so that's the reason all the default values were printed in this section. And apart from that, so you can find the difference between this this logger and this logger. So this logger, so this is the previous first logger. So in this logger, you can see that correlation ID, let me make it as visible mode. So here you can see the difference. So this is the previous logger, previous one which is set before set variable. So correlation ID is printed here, process path is there. These two only are printed in that particular logger. But whatever the logger you placed after the set variables, you can find these two variables under this part. Correlation ID and order ID you have mentioned. Order ID you have stored in that test var variable, and then this is the test var variable, and order ID you have stored under order ID variable name. So these two will be printed in this logger. So that is the difference between this previous logger and after logger. So this remove logging variable. So the purpose of this remove logging variable is used to remove this set logging variables. We can remove this set logging variables by keeping this variable name here. So here I have kept this name order ID. So I don't want this order ID print in this particular logger. So go to this message flow and let me keep a logger here. Let me keep a breakpoint here. So we will discuss about this with correlation ID also. But before, after completing this remove logging variable, we will discuss with correlation ID. So I am hitting to directly go to this and this flow. So now the event is here in this end logger. Let me finish this execution and go to that console, and you can see in that particular console, make it as larger. See, in that last logger, you can see correlation ID and processor path and test var. So because we are using that remove logging variable, and we have defined that value, so that's the reason we have defined the variable name order ID, and we are defining the value payload.order ID. So that's the reason that variable is removed from this particular logger. You can see it here. Only test var is there, order ID is not there. So with the help of remove logging variable, you can remove whatever variable you want to remove from the logger. And next, let's move on to this with correlation ID. As we have discussed earlier, with correlation, it is the scope of this tracing module. With the help of this with correlation ID, you can simply define your correlation ID to track that particular event. So if you go and check the logger, so this is the first logger, and here this is the correlation ID. So for each and every event, one unique ID will be generated to trace that particular event. From hitting request to last will getting the response, one unique ID will be generated. That unique ID is called correlation ID. So this is the default value which is defined to this particular correlation ID for this particular event. So you can see for every logger, this is same. See, here 90E6 it is ending, 90E6 it is ending. And if you see this last logger also, you can see 90E6. So this is the correlation ID. But with this correlation ID scope, you can modify the correlation ID. So here, after this correlation ID, I am concatenating this correlation ID with payload.customer ID. So this is the customer ID I am passing, and I want to print this customer ID along with this correlation ID. So this is the logic for that particular scenario. So I am adding that payload.customer ID to this correlation ID. So let me hit it one more time, and let me keep a breakpoint here, and let me remove this breakpoint. And let me remove this breakpoint also. So our flow will, the execution will stop here. So let me hit the payload. So now I am changing this customer ID. G. This is the customer ID. Now I am sending. Now the flow execution came here. So till before this logger, let us see what's the correlation ID. You can see from this logger the correlation ID here. This is the correlation ID 555196. This is the correlation ID. This is the correlation ID, and with correlation ID, let me clear this console once and let me hit it again to avoid the confusion. Let me complete this execution also and let me hit it one more time to avoid confusion. Let me finish this execution. Let me clear this console. Let's go and hit this request. Go to here and the execution is stopped here. So now you can see this first logger. This is the logger information for that particular logger, and here you can see the correlation ID 7C90E6. That is the correlation ID, and this is the payload which is printed. And in this next logger, this is the second logger. In this logger, you can see correlation ID, order ID, from this set variable order ID, and from this set variable test variable, and this is the processor path. Okay, and next, this is the default payload request path, and these and all the attributes, default attributes which are coming under this logger section, because we did not mention anything here, so that's why all the default values are printing here. Let's move to the next processor. Let's check the variable, what variable is printed. Logger with modified correlation ID. So this is the one. So you can see till here this is the correlation ID. Let me make it enlarge. This is the correlation ID. Till here this is the correlation ID of this particular event, and we are concatenating this correlation, default correlation ID with this customer ID. So this is the customer ID that is added here. And let's move on to next processor and check what will be printed in the next logger. Let me hit to the next processor. Let's stop the execution here and go to this console, make it enlarge, and so these are the two loggers which I have wrapped inside this with correlation ID scope. Same you can find correlation ID with customer ID. Correlation ID with customer ID. Okay, let's move on to the next processor. What you can see in the next processor. Let me go to this console and you can see now. So whatever the correlation ID with correlation ID scope you have defined, that is confined to that particular scope only. Whatever the operations which are performed inside the scope, this correlation ID will be applicable. So here, for suppose database operations will be there, query or delete or Salesforce operations are there. This correlation ID is confined to that operations which are kept inside the scope. So once this event or once this came out of this execution came out of the scope, the default correlation ID will be applicable to the next events. So in your application, if you want to trace one particular event, like JMS operation or database, if you are using Salesforce, and if you are using other if you are connecting with other web services, so whatever the event which you want to trace, so all those operations you need to wrap inside this with correlation ID scope. So whatever the operations which are performed inside this with correlation ID, they will those operations they will be printed with this defined correlation ID. So once you came out of this scope, so the default correlation ID will be printed in the logger. So that is the advantage of this with correlation ID. In such scenarios, if you want to generate or if you want to define your own correlation ID. So next, jump into this one more operation is there, that is clear logging variable. So let me remove this logging variable here. Let me remove this logging variable and let me add this clear logging variable, and let me add a logger also. That I will take it from this palette, favorites, logger. Let me paste this logger here. So this clear logging variable, it is already predefined. The display name is clear logging variable, and in this logger just I want to print this correlation ID. Click on this apex and give the correlation name, correlation ID. So let me save this and click on this console. Let's see this execution is started or not. Yeah, it is running. Application is running. So it is started. So let me keep a breakpoint. Already the breakpoint is here. So the flow will stop here. Let me hit with this request and let us go to this studio. So here the execution stopped here. So let's check this logger. Go to console and let me clear this console. Let me complete this execution. Let me hit it one more time. Clear this console again. Clear console and then hit the studio. Now check this logger. So here how many loggers are there? 1, 2 and 3. So let's check one by one logger. So this is the initial logger. So here the correlation ID is this, and processor path is this, and there is no variables here. And in the second logger you can able to see this correlation ID, and along with these two variables which we have defined in the set logging variable, order ID and test variable. And let's see the third. So here we have used clear variable, clear logging variable. So in this info logger, so we are unable to see these two variables because we are using here clear logging variable. So whatever the variables we have created in this flow, those variables will be removed if you use clear variable. So that is the difference between remove variable and clear variable. So in the previously we have seen that we have removed this order variable and we can able to see this test variable. But in this scope we have used clear logging variable. So that's the reason this test variable is removed and order ID is also removed. So this is the today's session. Hope you like it.